Welcome to This Explainer. I'm super excited you're here today because we're diving straight into one of the most thrilling historical mysteries ever. We're talking about a guy who literally changed the course of history in just a few short years, Alexander the Great. But here's the thing. Behind that massive, legendary name, there's actually a really complex web of secrets and myths. Let's try and unravel them together.
Okay, let's dive into this. When we ask a seemingly simple question, who was the real Alexander the Great? We immediately hit a wall of glaring contradictions. We're not just talking about minor academic squabbles over dates. No, we're talking about the very core of who he was. What actually drove this man to completely upend the lives of millions? I mean, we all recognize this face, right? This is the iconic, classical bust that pops into our heads when we hear his name. But here is the wild part. Even though his face is so familiar to us, historians are actually bitterly divided over what was going on inside his head. Was he driven by some noble, overarching purpose, or was he just a guy consumed by megalomania and his own personal whims? So, the crucial point is that we're looking at two wildly contrasting historical opinions here. On one side, you have the ancient historian Plutarch, who paints Alexander as this visionary philosopher, dreaming of human brotherhood and global harmony. But then, you look at modern scholars, and they see a bloodthirsty tyrant, a ruthless killer, who was basically just manipulated by his mother Olympias and driven by pure, uncontrollable anger. How on earth does one guy leave behind such completely opposite impressions? The debate over his true identity is actually so extreme that scholars compare it to the Homeric question. If you're not familiar, that's the debate over whether the ancient poet Homer was one person or actually multiple people, because the writings are so different. The historical accounts of Alexander are so wildly conflicting, it's almost like we're reading about multiple, entirely different people who just happen to share the same name. Section 1. The Historical Sources Crisis, Searching in the Dark. Now, are you ready for a massive shock? Here it is. 0. That is the exact number of fully intact contemporary historical accounts we have of his life. Absolutely nothing that was written while he was actually alive survived the test of time as a complete work. Crazy, right?
There were absolutely people who traveled with him, guys like Callisthenes, who is his official historian and actually a student of Aristotle. Plus, his top generals, Ptolemy and Nearchus, were there too. They kept official diaries and first-hand reports. But heartbreakingly for historians, all those direct sources are totally lost to history. All we're left with are scattered fragments, and the complete works that did survive were written way, way later by historians like Arrian and Plutarch.
And that brings us to the real problem. 300. There is a massive, roughly 300-year gap between Alexander's death and the major surviving narratives that we rely on today. Imagine trying to write a totally accurate biography of someone who lived 3 centuries ago, using just a handful of leftover quotes. Naturally, that massive historical void left room for something else entirely to rush in.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what actually filled that gap. Human imagination absolutely took over. We got this collection of bizarre, fantastical legends known as the Alexander Romance. These stories spread like wildfire, translated into 24 different languages. They featured Alexander fighting dragons, literally talking to trees, being claimed as an ancestor by Malay royalty, and even being portrayed as a deeply pious believer. It's a prime example of myth taking over when the facts go missing.
Section 2. The Foundation of Facts, the Undisputed Timeline.
Let's look at what we absolutely know for sure, this rapid, brilliant, and honestly tragic chronological roadmap. He's born in 356 BCE. By 338 BCE, at just 18, he's already commanding cavalry at the Battle of Chaeronea. 336 BCE, his father is assassinated, and he is crowned king. 2 years later, in 334 BCE, he invades Asia, and then, 323 BCE, his sudden death. It is an unbelievable string of monumental events, all happening in just a blink of an eye, historically speaking.
But how do you actually forge a leader like that? Well, to be the heir of a hardcore place like Macedonia, Alexander went through some intense physical and intellectual training to mold him into this Homeric-style hero. Step 1, proving his physical grit by killing a wild boar without even using a hunting net. Step 2, getting a top-tier intellectual education mentored by none other than the philosopher Aristotle. And Step 3, showing incredible bravery by taming the mighty, famously stubborn horse Bucephalus, who would end up riding with him all the way to the Indus River.
And this brilliantly illustrates the actual physical reality of the man. Take a really close look at this tiny ivory head found in the royal tomb at Vergina. Experts strongly believe this is Alexander. When you look closely, you can actually see what many believe are physical battle scars and a deep sense of exhaustion in his face. It is a powerful reminder of his humanity and the literal physical toll his life took, entirely cutting through all those crazy mythical legends.
Now, to really grasp the sheer audacity of this guy, check out these numbers. In the spring of 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Dardanelles into Asia Minor to directly challenge the vast Persian Empire, the absolute superpower of the world at that time. And he did it with an invasion force of just 30,000 foot soldiers and 5,000 cavalry. Choosing to take on a massive global empire with such a comparatively small force, the level of risk and pure confidence there is just off the charts.
But of course, this epic run comes to a crashing halt. June 323 BCE, the sudden end in Babylon. Alexander falls seriously ill with a severe fever, and this happened right after the crushing grief of losing his closest companion, Hephaestion. He died at the shockingly young age of 32. The man who literally conquered the known world was just gone, leaving his massive empire and his generals in total chaos.
Despite his incredibly short life, and even with all those deeply flawed historical sources we talked about, his impact on world history is absolutely undeniable. Even Napoleon Bonaparte was completely in awe of his military genius, saying he conquered in a bold endeavor. He was far greater than ordinary human capacity. When guys like Napoleon are fanboying over you, you know you've left a permanent mark on the world for sure.
So we've navigated through the dense fog surrounding this legendary figure. We've seen the wild contradictions, uncovered the massive historical blind spots, and walked through the undeniable hard facts of his short but explosive life. So now I want to turn it over to you. Knowing that so much of what we hear about him might just be ancient propaganda and myth, based strictly on the facts, how will you measure the legacy of Alexander the Great? I really hope this explainer sparked your curiosity to dig even deeper. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.